Now, we've been looking at side pin escapes, but there's been a common factor in all of them. Mateus, you lie down. All the side pins that we've been escaping from had one commonality. The opponent was on two knees. So regardless of the manner in which he held us and the manner in which we escaped, he was always here on two knees. Okay. Now, in my opinion, staying on two knees like this is the most stable, the most versatile, and the most effective way of holding people in side pins. But it's not the only way. And there's plenty of people, and for good reasons, often change their base of support and engage in what often is referred to as a sit out or a sit through in order to change their hip positioning. And this can be a very good tactic on the part of the guy on top, and the man on bottom must understand how to deal with this, because it does change the nature of the escape slightly. So if Mateus is holding bottom position in here, I don't have to stay on my knees. This is one good option. In my opinion, it's actually the best option. It's the most stable and the most versatile. But a good thing for many of your opponents will be to sit their body through. And from here, they go into a position, Kazur Kizigatame, okay, or is often referred to as a sit out or a sit through in the United States. From here, they have an underhook. They're not naive. They're not coming through into a true Kizigatame here, where there's a danger of back exposure, etc., etc. This is a very good pinning position if you only have to hold for short periods of time and you're only interested in pinning people. People tend to dismiss this position. They're a little unfair in that dismissal. This can be a very strong pinning position. It's not a bad submission position either. There's some good submissions out of here. It tends to get dismissed a little bit in the jiu-jitsu community, but it's a popular part of judo and a popular part of wrestling for a reason. It is an effective method of pinning. However, it does come at a price if you have two athletes the same size and same skill level of back exposure. It's not seen much in the sport of jiu-jitsu for that reason, because we have to be able to hold pins for very long periods of time and submit people from them and transition to other pins. But if you were just interested in holding someone for a few seconds, or in the case of judo for 20 to 25 seconds, this can be a very effective pinning method. However, a much more widely seen method in the sport of jiu-jitsu, because it doesn't involve back exposure, is the Kazura Kizigatame, okay, or broken scarf hold, where I work with an underhook instead of a headlock. And truth be told, I do greatly prefer this in the sport of jiu-jitsu over the classic Kizigatame. Okay? So the Kazura Kizigatame, or sit out as it's often referred to in America, is a very, very strong form of pinning. We've got to know how to get out of here, because now my opponent's hip position has changed. Instead of being here on two knees, my opponent has sit through and come into this very strong position. Now understand that the strength of this position is largely bound up with the control of this elbow. Okay, the more I elevate this elbow, the stronger the control that I have. The more Mateus can pull his elbow down towards the floor, the less control that I have. And if I felt Mateus's elbow coming down here, it would probably be wise for me now to return back to my knees and work with a more conventional side pin. Okay, so how are we going to deal with this sit out? Let's look now at some good options for dealing with sit-out side pins. We'll have Mateus out to our side here. We saw that whenever someone elects to sit out, the primary concern that we have is the position of our elbow. There's a direct contest here. Mateus wants my elbow close to his left hip, and I want my elbow close to his right hip. And who wins that battle between right hip and left hip is the guy who's going to win this pin situation. So, a natural question to ask is, how do we win this? First method, anticipation. Mateus, start on two knees. If I know Mateus is a fellow who likes to transition from a situation on two knees to a sit out, I'm going to anticipate that, and I'm going to make damn sure that my elbow goes in the preferred position, down by my opponent's bottom hip instead of his top hip. Okay, what he wants is to sit out and drag my elbow to his top hip, and from here the skates can be quite difficult. So what I want to make sure is as I see my opponent switch from a crossface to my elbow, I know what's coming next. That's the giveaway. Go back. Here, he's got his crossface in place. Okay? If he reaches for my elbow, 3 guesses what's coming next. The only thing that really makes sense now is a sit out. And if he connects my elbow to his top hip, it's a problem. So, as soon as I see Mateus release his crossface, my first thing here is always to take my elbow down to the mat. Now when Mateus sits through, my elbow goes to his bottom hip instead of the top hip. Exactly what I wanted. In addition, my opponent's head position has changed, and there's no reason now why I can't bring my hand across to my training partner's chest, because the distance between his head and my head is now much greater. Come back. Here, if my opponent's head is in position, it can be very difficult to get my hand in as a blocker. But the moment Mateus sits through, it becomes very easy now to get a forearm across the chest. So I've got my right elbow in good position and my left forearm in good position. As Mateus goes to hold me down in this situation, we're going to focus on shrimping our hips away from our opponent. And as a result, it becomes very easy for us to form the fundamental V-shaped frame, which is the basis of all success in getting out of side pins and indeed many other pins. As Mateus tries to hold me in place now, it's so difficult for him to prevent the extension of my body, which will ultimately align us and create a situation where we can go back into the safety of guard. Once again, the first method, anticipation. When my opponent's on 2 knees and goes to grab my elbow, it's no secret what's coming next. As soon as Mateus makes his sit-through attempt, we put the elbow down here at the hip. We're aiming for our elbow at his bottom hip. He's aiming the elbow to the top hip. That's very much in his best interest and very much in my worst interests. So we always want the elbow down there at the bottom hip. Now, we're going to bring our second hand here across the chest. And we're going to engage in a shrimping action, where I take my foot, 1, 2, 3, and move out. When Mateus tries to follow me, my elbow makes it very, very difficult. And I'll always be able to move away faster than Mateus can move towards me. And as a result, we can quickly go to put our opponent back in guard. The key, as always, is to create a frame that I can move behind, and my opponent can't follow my movement. What I don't want is Mateus having direct contact to my body. As he comes out, he currently has direct chest to chest and hip to chest contact. That's great for him and terrible for me. Going back. So as soon as I see him grab the elbow, he goes to sit out. Now he has contact not chest to chest and hip to chest, but his hip to my elbow and his chest to my forearm. So the contact is not directly on me, it's on my frames. And as a result, I can shrimp away from him. When he tries to follow, my elbows make it so difficult. When I finally join knee and elbow, it's actually impossible from now to get any kind of effective contact. And from here, we have many ways to go on the attack, counter offense, etc., etc. This is an extremely effective way of countering this sit-out form of side pin. Now, we just looked at a very effective way of dealing with a popular and highly effective variation of side pinning where my opponent sits out, the so-called Kazura Kezukatame. The method we looked at relied on anticipation. Our opponent made a transition. We saw what he was doing. We identified the switch from a crossface to an elbow control. Based upon that identification, we anticipated what he was about to do, and we went into a very effective escape. There's always going to come a day when you fail to anticipate. You're a day late and $1 short. Maybe you had a long night in the champagne room at the strip club the night before, and your thinking's not in order, and as a result, you fail to anticipate the move, and your opponent gets to a very good pinning position. Okay, so Mateus gets to my elbow. gets to my elbow, and sits through. I failed to anticipate what he's doing, and as a result, he's gone into a true Kazuo Kezugatame, and he's pinning me very, very effectively as a result. Okay, how am I going to get my elbow back? We know that everything here is based on the idea of elbow position. I need my elbow on his bottom hip. He needs my elbow on the top hip, and he's just won the battle. He's got what he wants, and I don't have what I need. So what are we going to do? In these kinds of situations, I always recommend moving away from our opponent and taking the second hand across. And I want to use this hand here as a thumb post. I put my thumb inside my training partner's bicep. I can't be naive here. I can't reach far across my opponent and expose my second arm to a Wakagitame submission hold, where he hugs my wrist, brings his right elbow across, and goes into a nasty arm break from here, Wakagitame. So we can't be naive in the fashion in which we do this. So I want to start by posting on my training partner's shoulder. That's usually pretty easy because of the very nature of Kazuo Kezugatame. It's usually pretty simple to bump and get the hand across. I'm going to take my thumb and put it inside the bicep. Now from here, I'm going to shrimp and I'm going to extend my left arm and I'm going to pull with my right. Even as he holds on tight here, you get an ability to extract. Don't be naive and push across and have him go right into Wakagitame. Okay, so we keep everything in close, and then from this position, the knees come back in, and we're in a good position now to recover our guard. Once again, thumb posting. My opponent gets the beat on me and pulls the arm up, and I'm in a very compromised position now. So we start by bringing our forearm across. From here, we start the action of shrimping so that we get onto our side. Then I thumb post inside my training partner's bicep, making sure that I don't reach beyond and expose my arm to a possible Wakagitame counter. Now from here, we start that action of pulling our elbow into the bottom hip. He needs to bring my elbow back up. It won't be easy. And as a result, we can shrimp and bring our legs back in. Okay? Now, that's a fairly simple and pretty easy way for us to get around a bad situation where our opponent's dominated the elbow. I'm just going to throw in some details now about the use of reverse shrimping out of these sit-out pins. If we have Mateus here across my side, most of the time when someone sits through, I generally recommend, once we've got our frames in place, just conventional shrimping, so that we can bring knee and elbow together. But there's always going to be times you feel it's very, very difficult to move the required distance to bring your knee in. It's usually because your opponent shrimps and moves with you, so that every time you shrimp out, he moves with you. And this can feel very difficult to deal with. Whenever I see that kind of thing going on, I'll often use reverse shrimping, where I take my legs and I reach for the mat, just like so, and I get a bigger movement, which often facilitates the escape from this position. Just by myself, number test. So we know now that conventionally we shrimp by pushing, but it is also possible to shrimp by pulling. And we generally move longer distances using these methods in order to put an opponent back in guard. So here, Mateus has made the transition. We've gone across and put our elbow in place, but when we go to shrimp, he just moves with us. Rather than just get into an endless game of a cat chasing its own tail, we now take our legs, we take our foot out, and we reach for the mat. And we use a much bigger shrimping motion made possible by the reverse shrimp to go back into guard position. Very often you'll catch your opponent in situations where there's an isolated arm, you've got all kinds of submission attacks from this position, but most of the time he'll quickly get back up to his knees, and from here we'll realign and put him back in some variation of open guard. These are some very effective ways to deal with this common problem of a sit-out side pin, classically known as Kazuo Kezugatame. Now, we just looked at a situation where our opponent had us in a side pin and he elected to sit out. Understand something. He can sit out in two different directions. Okay, the more commonly seen method involves a kazua kizgatame, where our opponent sits out facing towards the head, going forwards, like so. But this is not the only way of sitting out. Many of your opponents will favor a reverse sit out, where from here they transfer the elbow across to a reverse cross face, they bring their hand in, and they will sit out facing the legs rather than the head. And this too provides different kinds of difficulties. Not only does it provide different kinds of difficulties, but also different kinds of transitional difficulties. Your opponent from a position like this will find it very easy to step over into other pins, such as the mounted position. So there's a dual threat here. There's the threat of the pin itself, which is a difficult one to get away from. There's there's different submission opportunities when your opponent sits through towards the legs. He has a wide array of arm lock attacks, especially kimura attacks. In a no-gi situation, he will have a wide variety of leg lock attacks from here. And at any given moment, especially at fundamentals level, people will use this position to step over into the mounted position. And now you're facing your opponent racking up large numbers of points on you in a fairly short period of time. So we have to know how to deal with this sit-out position when my opponent reverses direction back towards our legs. Let's have a look at it. Okay, you can usually recognize when your opponent is about to hit this move when they transfer from a cross face to a reverse cross face. Typically, not essentially, but typically, their hand will now go to block your hip. Sometimes they'll put a hand on the opposite knee, up here. Sometimes they'll put a hand on the opposite hip, like so. They're all good options. But this here is almost always the telltale sign that some kind of reverse sit-out is coming. Whenever I see someone now sit through in this position, there's a battle now for elbow position. What he wants is my elbow outside his hip, because now he can take my elbow into a position of extreme weakness and vulnerability and make things very, very hard for me to escape. Coming back. So, the minute I see my opponent bring his arm over here to the opposite side, anticipation warning lights are going off. I'm going to make sure I keep my elbow in close to my body. As Mateus goes to sit out, we now have our elbow in the inside position. I'm going to focus on turning in. I don't want my body facing flat up so that, sitting up, Mateus? Sitting up. From here, I don't want my arm pinned flat down in a position rather like an American lock. Rather, what I want is my body on its side, facing the arm here, with as much less vulnerability in my arm. So, as Mateus makes the transition, I immediately retract my elbow in close. I don't want my elbow outside his hip. I want my elbow inside the hip. And as he goes to sit out, I turn onto my side. Okay? From this position, we're in a much more sound defensive position than we were previously. As my opponent goes to work in a position like this, if he just goes to hold me, I'm going to take now my legs and go into a bridging action, which will force my opponent to push back and correct his base. As soon as we see that, our knee comes in, we plant our foot, shrimp, we put our opponent back in guard. So once again, first, anticipation. I see his arm coming across to a reverse crossface. I make damn sure my elbow is inside his hip. Now from here, as he goes to sit out, I turn onto my side. And as a result, we're in a pretty strong defensive position. This is going to make it relatively easy for us to threaten a strong bridge, force a defensive reaction on the part of our opponent. And from here, we can easily put our opponent back in guard position. Sometimes, when I see my opponent sit through, from here he'll play a waiting game and just place the hand here on the knee, making it difficult for us to bridge, etc., etc. Whenever we see this kind of thing going on, I will always take my hand and post on my training partner's bicep, just like so, and bring my knee in front of my training partner's bicep, like so, almost like a kind of a weird looking spider guard. Now, as I open my knee to the outside, you'll always be able to pull your opponent back onto his knees, and from this position, we're looking good to put him back in guard. Sometimes, when your opponent hits the sit through, you will be able to time the sit through and just bridge up on top of your opponent and come up into a top position. This relies perhaps on a little naivety on the part of your opponent, because if he shifts his hips, he should be able to avoid this in most cases. But we create a dilemma now between a powerful bridge that takes him backwards and what he has to do to stop being taken backwards. And that's to bring his knees back. When the knees come back, we put him back in guard. So I want you thinking about the bridge in terms of a simple dilemma. If he doesn't react to the bridge, he will go over onto his back. In order to stop that from happening, he's going to have to heist his hips and get back to his knees. And that action will make it very easy to elbow escape back and put him back in guard. Let's have a look at this simple dilemma from a different angle. My opponent goes to sit through from here. If my opponent doesn't react, we just plant our 2 feet on the mat and we come up on top. If my opponent sits out and he's got good reaction speed and I go into a strong bridge, he can usually feel that because my legs get tense here and he's got hands close to the legs, so he can anticipate my bridge. When we hit that strong bridge and we see him reacting, our knee goes in and we're back in guard. Now, let's go over the element where our opponent elects to step into the mounted position. Okay, if my opponent brings the arm through and sits through, and then from here, he takes his foot and slaps his foot on the mat, and then drives his body up into the mounted position, you've gone from one bad situation to another. But I've got some good news for you. When your opponent sits through and passes his foot over, just freeze, you're going to hear something. You're going to hear the footfall of your opponent hitting the mat. As the foot comes over, there it is. It's unmistakable. Now, observe your opponent's body position when you hear that sound. It's mechanically weak. His whole body position is designed to drive forward into the mount. But in this position here, there's literally no base going backwards. So the second I hear that footfall, we just take our feet and bridge back in the direction that he came from. And as a result, you always end up in top position. Let's have a look at that again. This is an Upa escape based on anticipation. We have an opponent on top of us. He makes a sit through. From here, I hear him going to the mount, and we come straight back up and over, and we time our bridge according to the sound of his foot hitting the mat. Okay? When he's in that sit-through position and steps over, there's always that sound. And when you hear that sound, it's time to bridge. If your opponent's smart, he will soften his footstep. Like so. But there has to be contact of the foot to the mat. Okay, go back. So, if he steps aggressively, you'll hear the foot. And we bridge right back. If he steps softly, then from here we have to feel his knee touching the side of our hip. Not the mat, that means he's already mounted. I just feel his knee on my hip. And that becomes my new signal to turn and come up into top position. Now, an obvious question. What if you got caught napping? What if you weren't paying attention and your opponent got his knee down to the floor? Don't worry, there's still good things you can do. My opponent's taken the sit-out option, the reverse sit-out option, and he steps over and goes forward into mount. Don't worry, we can always catch our training partner's arm. And now, as our opponent goes driving his body weight forward into the mount, now we can hit Upa in the direction he was going. Okay? So we have either an Upa going against our opponent's direction or an Upa going with our opponent's direction, depending upon how far or how early or how late we are in our movements. If we can correctly time our opponent and we hear that foot, we just go straight back into him. If perhaps we're a little late and I feel his knee touching the mat, then we'll bridge with him. Either way, we end up on top and the danger is being subverted. Now, even if my opponent goes over and I feel he's a very heavy fellow and bridging may not always be a good option, even as he goes over, this leg here, the trail leg, will always become light. And as he goes into the mounted position, it's almost always the case that we can reach across and seize our training partner's ankle. And as a result, we can quickly put our opponent back in variations of guard, which will make us get back to a position of safety. So understand that when our opponent sits through towards the legs, when he steps over to the mount, there's a transfer of weight. And as his right knee drives for the mat, you will almost always be able to elbow escape on the light leg, the trail leg. Okay? Now from here, it's not so hard for us to capture our training partner's knee. And from a situation like this, continue the elbow escape and get back into business. Understand that anytime your opponent transfers from side position to mounted position, there must inevitably be a transfer in weight, no matter how skilled your opponent is. Sometimes it will be more, sometimes it will be less. That will depend upon your opponent's skill. But there will always be some degree of transfer of weight, and we can take advantage of this. Understand that your opponent has two legs. He has a lead leg and a trail leg. And as your opponent drives hard with the lead leg, the trail leg will become light. So, as Mateus hits the reverse sit-out, his lead leg is his right leg, and that leads the way to the mounted position. As he steps over and drives his knee to the floor, the left leg will become the leg left behind, the trail leg, and it will become correspondingly light as the right leg gains weight towards the mounted position. And as a result, we can easily elbow escape. With that inverted knee, we easily go underneath our training partner's ankle and make a catch. Once we lock the triangle here, it's an easy thing to get his knee off the mat and stuff the leg between our legs. And from here, not such a difficult thing for us now to come up and into our guard offense from bottom. These represent some excellent ways to counter an otherwise problematic position, the reverse sit-out from side control. Now, let's turn our focus to escaping from knee on belly or knee on stomach situations. Understand that knee on stomach is a very different kind of pin. The Japanese term for knee on belly actually conveys some of the meaning involved. It's referred to as a floating pin, and that's exactly what it is. Unlike regular pins, which are focused around chest-to-chest contact and a solid set of wedges around your opponent's body, knee on belly has almost no wedges around your opponent's body. Okay, it's the philosophy behind it is radically different than conventional pins. Rather than being a wedge-based pin, it's a mobility-based pin. The idea is that in a fight situation, it creates distance between me and my opponent, and as a result, it's a very good punching platform. That's why it's rewarded in the sport of jiu-jitsu with points. But in a pure grappling context, that space between your opponent also has uses. It makes it very easy to access your opponent's lapels and go into all kinds of strangleholds from there. And of course, it's a very fast position. Because there's minimal contact with you and your opponent, you can use it as a transitory position where you can transfer to the mount, you can spin around your opponent's body and take their back if they turn into you, and you can go into north-south, all kinds of good things you can do from there. So it's a very valuable position even when there's no punching involved. However, its value is different from a regular pin. Rather than being a pin that stops your opponent in its tracks and holds them down, it's a pin designed to promote movement. And as a result, escaping from it is a very different thing from escaping from a regular chest-to-chest pin. If I have an opponent who's knee on belly on me in a no-gi situation, I typically like to attack my opponent's legs, because knee on belly creates situations where the legs are far apart. And as a result, it's relatively easy to get legs inside and start attacking your opponent with all manner of heel hooks and knee bars, etc., etc. So in the no-gi context, I usually go into my opponent's legs from this position. However, in a gi context, in a fundamentals class, that's clearly not acceptable. So what are we going to do? Let's instead use a single leg escape. So if we have Mateus out to our right hand side and in a knee on belly type situation, from here the first thing we're going to do is get his hands down to the mat. So we're going to place our knee right here at our training partner's hip, and in one motion I'm going to bump his body weight forward so his hands go off me and onto the mat. The minute they go onto the mat, we're going to shrimp our body out so that Mateus's knee is in front of my sternum. I don't want Mateus's knee over my body. Then it becomes very risky for me to turn into my opponent. He can go straight into mounted position and cause all kinds of problems. What I want is Mateus's knee here in front of my sternum, not over the far side of my body. That's going to create problems. Okay, so how are we going to ensure that that happens? Our training partner starts off in front of us. First things first, we position our knee right there on our training partner's hip, and we give a combination of bridge with the left foot and bump forward with the right knee. Then from here, we close our arm around our training partner's knee and we hit one big shrimp. And that's what puts my opponent's knee in front of my sternum. So once again, my opponent takes knee on belly position. From here, we put our knee on our training partner's hip and we bring his body weight forward. I put my elbow around my training partner's knee and we hit one big shrimp that puts his knee right in front of my sternum. Now, as he tries to put weight on me in this situation, it's very, very difficult. And it's relatively easy for us now to start coming up to our knees. From this position, we're in an excellent situation to go on the attack. A very good, simple first off attack here is a cutback because of the very nature of our position. I'm going to take my ear to my training partner's hip and we're going to cut back in this direction, catch our training partner's leg and end up in a nice reversal down to the floor. Okay, I'm just going to demonstrate the movements involved solo so you can see exactly what they are. So we have an imaginary opponent out to our right hand side and he's taken the knee on belly position. We're going to position our knee right on the outside of his hip. Then we're going to hit a combination of bridge off the left foot, so there's a bridge action, and we're going to bump forward. So there's two forces at work here. One is a bridging force and one is a bumping force. Now we're going to take our arm around our training partner's leg and we're going to bring his knee in front of our sternum. So everything's here in front. I don't want his knee going over here so that he can end up in the mounted position. Then from this position, we use a back heist. I'm on my back and I heist up to my knees, and now we're in a good position to circle our opponent down to the mat. So once again, we're going to start with Mateus on two knees. Then he's going to get a grip and he's going to pop up to knee on belly, like so. This is how most people go into the position. Okay. Now we place our knee right there on our Mateus's hip, and even though he's holding on tight to me, hips forward and holding me, pulling up on my body, making things uncomfortable, pulling up, making things uncomfortable, even from here, we can hit a good little bridge action that brings everything forward. Now I capture my training partner's knee. I use a shrimping motion. Sometimes from here you can even just use a kind of a momentum of your legs to come through. Okay? I capture my training partner and we end up in good position here with our single leg in place. Look how my head comes up. That's what signifies the cutback. Even as Mateus is trying to bring his leg in this direction, my head position makes it very, very difficult. And from here, we capture our training partner's heel, and to finish the cutback, we pull the heel in, and usually we end up in a kind of a over-under position on our opponent, ready to start the passing game for a full reversal. Okay, let's have a look at the whole sequence again. Okay, we've got an opponent who started across our side. I feel his switching grips. Let's go back a step, Mateus. Here, this is clearly a cross-body pin. I feel Mateus's hands switching to belt and lapel. You know what's coming next. It's going to be knee on belly. That's the only movement that makes sense off this grip. Okay, so once again, anticipation. Here, he's chest to chest. This is a side pin. When I feel my opponent make a switch, you know it's going to be knee on belly any second now because of the grip that he's taken. Now, as he pops up, we place our knee right here at our training partner's hip. We're going to bridge off the left foot and snap the right leg forward and get his hands down to the mat. If his weight is on his hands, it's not on me. Right now, all the weight's on me. You can hear my voice as I'm bearing the strain. But the moment we bring him forward and capture the knee, now we have an ability to use either our legs in a shrimping motion or a whipping motion to come up. From here, it's all about my head position. I want my head coming in here to the classic cutback position where my ear goes towards his hip. He wants his leg going forward, and it's a battle of his leg against my head. If my head comes down, he wins the battle. So my whole thing is to use a post hand here on the floor. When he tries to bring the leg forward, I use my head position. Now my hand goes off the mat and captures my training partner's heel. He's going to want to put me back in guard. So you know that knee's going to come in. We're going to capture our training partner's far hip. And we now usually find ourselves in an over-under type passing situation. We'll be looking at a lot of over-under passing when we get to guard passing. But for now, it's a strong position. We've got a complete reversal on your opponent. You're out of knee on belly and you're ready to start attacking. Now, let's look at a method of escaping from knee on belly, which can be a very useful addition to your escape arsenal. Knee on belly is a little different from most pins. The Japanese name for knee on belly suggests that it's a floating pin, and that's a good sense in which it works. It's a dynamic, movement-based pin rather than a traditional chest-to-chest immobility or immobilizing pin. The basic idea behind knee on belly is it creates distance between yourself and your opponent, so you can throw hard punches and move side to side and use dynamicism to hold people down rather than solid connection. As a result, it takes a little bit of a different methodology to go and escape it. Let's have a look at one particularly effective form of escape, an ankle trap. The situation where Sean Williams is knee on belly on top of me. From here, it can be very risky for me to start putting hands on my training partner's knee, because this will expose an underhook on the far side, from where my opponent can easily go into arm lock attacks, kimura attacks, all kinds of bad things. Okay. In general, nothing good happens when you start reaching here for the knee like this. It's often problematic. Now, the reason why this is problematic is because Sean Williams' foot is free to move. Okay, there's nothing controlling the foot. And so when I put my hand on the knee, look how easily he can turn around and spin into submission holds or go into kimuras or wherever he wants. Okay? So what we're going to do, I'll just change the angle so you can see what's going on. As he goes into knee on belly, we're going to keep our body in compact, like so. I'm going to take my hand and put it here in the sole of my training partner's foot. We're going to give a small bridge and movement forward so that I can lock the figure of four over my training partner's ankle. Now it becomes safe for me to start putting hands on my opponent's body. He can't turn into an arm lock anymore because I have his foot controlled. And there's no reason under these circumstances why we can't shut our training partner's knee over to the inside by turning our knees inwards. Now we get a hold of our training partner's waist, we get a hold of our training partner's second leg, and we switch a triangle around our training partner's leg. And we find ourselves back in the ankle trap escape. Just like before, we tilt our training partner over and end up in good position. Once again, we have an opponent on top of us, and they've chosen knee on belly as their method of pinning. It doesn't matter whether he's holding belt, lapels, whatever. We get a hold of our training partner's foot, and from here we give a bump. It brings his weight forward, it makes it possible for us to get a hold of our training partner's ankle. When we get a hold of the ankle, make sure your grip is above the line of the Achilles tendon. And as a result, we can now start shucking our training partner by turning everything inwards. Now, we go around the waist, we switch our grip on the legs, and we come in and score both knees. We bring his two knees together. As a result, we can turn the man over and end up in good position. One more time. Now, first, we bring his weight forward as we get a hold of the foot. That's going to make it possible for us to lock over the top. Now, we take hand to the knee and we turn everything to the inside. We block the knee, switch our legs, and now we have a true ankle trap. Even with no hand, because my knees point down to the floor when he tries to yank out, it's a very difficult thing indeed. We catch a hold of our training partner. If he puts his leg out wide and away from me, off the floor, out wide, good. It's also permissible here to get a hold of our training partner's knee pants and hold them just like so. And as a result, we can turn the man over. One more time. You have an opponent who's gotten into the knee on belly position. We bring his body weight forward and we secure the ankle. From here, we stuff the ankle and lock. Now we're in a good position to put a hand on the knee and shuck everything to the inside. We block the knee, switch our grip, and from here we make a choice on either a pant grip if the leg is far away, or a scoop grip if the knee is in close. We bring everything in towards him and dump him down to the mat. Let's look at an important detail here when it's time to get a hold of our training partner's leg. Okay, when we first go in and bring our training partner's weight forward, we want to make sure that the knee doesn't go across into the mounted position. So it's very important when we first go in that we block with an elbow here, so that by the time we get a hold of the foot, even if he should drive his knee to the mat, you're in a position now to complete an elbow escape on that side. Okay? So once again, we bring our opponent forward and we block here. Notice that I don't block here yet. Okay, that would expose ourselves to that arm lock danger we talked about earlier. So it's important we keep the arm close to the body. We don't surrender an easy underhook into submission holds. Now, as I block the knee, we trap our opponent's foot. Our whole thing is to turn everything inside. Then we block the knee a second time, switch our legs, and find ourselves in a position to take him over. Now, the obvious question is, well, what if my opponent positions his hips very strongly and I cannot push everything to the inside? Don't worry, then we'll hit an elbow escape on the other side. So, we come in, bump, block, and lock. But unfortunately, Sean Williams does a very good job of driving his knee to the mat. No problem. Now we lock the triangle in here. Look how I take his knee off the mat effortlessly just by churning in the opposite direction. And the knee comes easily off the floor. Now we block it, elbow escape it, and find ourselves back in the safety of guard. So regardless of which way our opponent's knee goes, if it goes across our body, we look for reversals. If it goes to the opposite side of our body, we hit a conventional elbow escape and put it back in guard. Let's have a look at that second variation again. Sean Williams does a good job of getting to the knee on belly position. We put our knee in, we bring his weight forward. We capture without exposing an underhook, and we get a hold of our training partner's ankle. But he drives across into something like a 3/4 mount. His two knees are on the floor, so he is technically mounted, but on the other hand, I've got his ankle trapped. But I put my elbow in front of his knee, and then all we do is just shift our hips. So I'm currently facing in this direction. I just shrimp while maintaining the grip on the ankle. As a result, we can easily capture his whole leg. Now, we complete the elbow escape in the usual fashion, but we've got our man back in guard. Done in this way, we get a very solid escape from what is often a troublesome position, knee on belly. Now, let's turn our focus to one of the most frustrating and difficult positions in the whole sport of jiu-jitsu to escape from. This is the north-south pin. North-south is often seen as a variation of side pinning, but in truth, it's actually a very different position. And the way in which you go to counter it and escape from it is substantially different than it is from conventional side escapes. Now, it's interesting that North-South doesn't score any additional points from side position in the sport of jiu-jitsu, even though it's actually a terrifying striking position. Knees from North-South are one of the most powerful blows in all of ground striking. So it's always been a bit of a mystery to me. I think it's more for practical reasons that it doesn't score points, because it would be such an easy transition from side position to north-south that people would just do that transition and rack up endless numbers of points. But in terms of its effectiveness for combat, it's a deadly striking position with knees. It's a very effective strangulation position with north-south strangles, and a devastating position to enter into arm locks, triangles, etc., etc. So it's a fantastic attacking position for the person on top, and it's a notoriously difficult position to escape from the person on bottom. Many students often come to me and say, I have no problem escaping from knee on belly, side position, mount position, but north-south position always gives me grief. Let's first start to understand a little bit more about the position itself. Why is it so problematic for so many students? I believe the root cause why most people struggle with north-south is because they tend to treat it as a variation of side position. And so they tend to use movements which are appropriate for side escapes against north-south, which is a very different form of hold. Okay? Let's understand something. When Mateus pins me from side position, my hips are relatively close to his hips. And so even small movements on my part will rapidly bring my body back into alignment with his. In addition, the insertion point of my knee is always at the hip. And the most high percentage escapes involve penetrating at the hip with my knee in order to put my opponent back in guard. Okay? That all changes when my opponent makes the transition into north-south. Now, my opponent's hips are a long way away from my hips, and it becomes very, very difficult for me to bring my knees inside my opponent's hips as we did for side position escapes. In addition, my opponent has his body weight centered very securely over my chest, and his hips and stomach provide strong control of my head. There's a dual threat now. My opponent can effortlessly go from one side of my body to attack arm locks here, and effortlessly transition to the other side for arm locks here, and go from left to right without even moving his body. If my opponent wants to attack both sides of my body from side control, he has to move substantially in order to go into attacks on my right side and then switch to attacks on my left side. It has to be some substantial movement on his part. But in north-south positions, that's not the case. Very small movements can enable him to go from attacks on my left to attacks on my right. So this is a very problematic position. Okay? First, understand something. The correct insertion points are going to change because of the change in angle between myself and my opponent from this north-south situation. That's the first thing. The most high percentage insertion points for elbow escapes are going to involve entering at our training partner's collarbones. So we don't enter at the hips as we do for side control, but rather we're going to be entering at the collarbones. In addition, most of our elbow escapes from north-south situations are going to involve a turn and spin. Most of our elbow escapes from side position just involve lining up with our opponent. But when we elbow escape out of north-south positions, we're going to have to turn 180 degrees in order to turn and face our opponent. Okay? In addition, the kazushi, or off-balancing, from bottom north-south is radically different than it is from side control. In side control, most of the time, the fundamental method of off-balancing someone from side position is going to be bridging. Okay, we typically bridge in order to create off-balancing. And we can bridge as our pushes into us. We bridge in one direction, and from here we can bridge in the opposite direction, bridging back and forth until we can put our opponent back in guard. The fundamental kazushi or off-balancing motion from north-south is very, very different. From here, the fundamental movement for off-balancing here is a side-to-side pendulum action that can create substantial amounts of movement, which can get us back in position. Okay? So, seen in this light, you can see this is a very, very different position than it is from a regular side position. What I want you to do as a developing athlete is understand north-south as a radically different position from side position, and treat it accordingly. Even though it doesn't score any additional points, so people tend to dismiss it as it's just a variation of side control. No, it's not. It's a substantially different position where the kazushi, the entry points, and the general sense of what I'm trying to do to get out is radically different than it is side control. Treat it for what it is, a different methodology of pinning, and one which requires a different methodology of escape. Now, the first thing you've got to understand about north-south as a different kind of position for us to escape from is that it comes in 3 different varieties. And how you go to escape from north-south will be dramatically altered by which one of those 3 varieties he's holding me in. So, we have Mateus down. The 3 main varieties of north-south pin involve double under, double over, and over-under positioning. Here, I am over both of Mateus's arms. Typically from here, we lock into our training partner's belt, and we have the choice between being wedged in tight with our legs or coming up into a tripod action. Both are very effective in different ways. Okay, so you can clearly see the intention here is to go over my training partner's forearms like so. This forms a very, very tight connection to our opponent, and when he goes to move away from us in this situation, it's a very, very strong and robust pin. We can use our head as part of the pin by taking our knees off the mat, or we can focus on keeping locked in nice and tight like so. So that's the first variation. The second variation involves taking my body and going underneath my training partner's arms and locking in, usually at the belt, or just wedging my hands in close. So both of my elbows have gone over his arms and into the armpits and wedged in just like so. From here, when Mateus goes to move around, again, you've got very strong connection to your opponent's body, and it's difficult for him to move away from us. Okay? And now, what is arguably the best of the 3 variations. This is one where I use a mixed strategy of going over on one side and under on the other. This gives me the best of both worlds. Now I have direct threats to my opponent's arms the whole time, and I have the stability of being underneath the arm on the opposite side. So I'm dangerous on one side and controlling on the other. As Mateus goes to move around from this position, we're well locked in on our training partner's body. And from here, it's a very, very strong and robust, and for my opponent, dangerous pin. You can attack arms, legs, all kinds of things from this position. It's a fantastic controlling pin. Understand that most north-souths are not truly north-south pins at all. North-south implies that our 2 center lines are lined up just like so. But in reality, most north-south pins are actually diagonal pins. They go from our opponent's shoulder to the opposite hip. And in my opinion, this is the best way to work because it gives us a greater degree of stability. If I'm too lined up with my opponent in situations like this, and he goes into a strong bridge to a given side, there's a danger of me being taken over. Okay? However, if I line up with my training partner's opposite hip and shoulder. Now when he goes to bridge into us, it's almost impossible for him to be effective. Okay, and bridges rapidly lose their effect here. In addition, this creates the optimal angles for us to start going into the various forms of arm locks, etc., that we favor from north-south positioning. So as a general rule, when we understand north-south, let's understand it comes in three main varieties. Okay, first, both of my arms over both of his arms. Second, both of my arms underneath his two arms. And third, one arm over and one arm under. Most of these three positions, most of the time we use these three positions, we're lined up in diagonal lines, like so that we go from one of our opponent's shoulders to the opposite hip, rather than a true north-south position where you're directly over your opponent's center line. Typically, we face across in a slight diagonal angle, and from here, we're very, very difficult to move. Most of the time, when we employ just a pure holding position in north-south, we like to use the stability afforded by the belt. Okay, that gives a very, very strong sense of connection between ourselves and our opponent. When he goes to push me away from here, the belt makes it exceptionally difficult. Okay, if you had a very physically powerful opponent on top, on bottom, and he was able to, say for example, get his hands close together, and we weren't connected to the belt, if he bridged and pushed in situations like this, he could conceivably push me away far enough that from here the legs could start coming in. So it's often a good idea in these circumstances to anchor yourself to your opponent by accessing your opponent's belt. And now when he goes to do the same kind of element in bench press, it's a very difficult thing. Okay? So there's an understanding of what we're fighting against. In the next section, we'll look at what we're supposed to do when we're stuck underneath someone in this fashion. Now, let's look at our first escape out of north-south position. This is, in my opinion, overall the most important one. It's the one I make use of the most in training, and it's also the easiest one. Always understand that it's relatively unusual. It can happen, but it's unusual for your opponent to begin in a north-south position. Typically what happens is your opponent passes your guard and goes to side positions. Then they make a transition from side to north-south. Your single best opportunity to escape from north-south position is during that transition, because your opponent will have to switch his grips in such a way that you will be able to frame inside your opponent and start going into elbow escapes. But the nature of an elbow escape in north-south is radically different than it is in the other various positions, because it goes on over your head. You have to bring your legs high overhead and spin into the elbow escape. So even though we're still bringing elbow and knee together, elbow escape, it has a very different feel from conventional side elbow escapes. So we're going to start off with Mateus in a fairly conventional side pin. From here, we're going to take our hand and we're going to put in what we call a reverse crossface, where my hand goes across to this position. There are many different ways to hold yourself in bottom side control as far as forming defensive frames go. This would surely be among one of the most high percentage and effective frames you can use. It consists of a frame on our training partner's hip and this reverse crossface where my hand goes on my training partner's shoulder and my second arm goes here, my forearm goes across the line of the neck and head. This gives us an ability to move our training partner's head, and it's a very, very useful defensive frame. Now, not only is it defensively useful against side position, but it's going to be very useful when my opponent decides to transition to north-south. When he decides to make the transition to north-south, he almost always has to take his crossface out and replace it with a reverse crossface. Only now can he now block my hip and walk around into a north-south type situation. Okay, so let's go back. That's what's required on Mateus's part. So we're going to have our hand here ready for action. And when I see my opponent make the transition across, we're going to place our hand here in our training partner's armpit. So my wrist comes all the way up into the armpit and my second elbow goes off the hip and in close to my chest. Now as Mateus goes across into north-south, we're going to get opportunities to start a lifting action and expose the area in front of the shoulder and armpit. And as a result, we're going to be able to throw our legs up and connect our knee and our elbow together, forming the perfect opportunity to go into a variation of an elbow escape. We're going to turn and lock a scissoring effect with our legs. When Mateus tries to put weight on me here, he's going directly into my legs. And as a result, we can easily hold him off. Now from here, as always, we push, extend, our legs come in, and we're back in business and ready to attack. So once again, we have an opponent out to our side. We're going to start off with our hands framed in fairly conventional positions. This is a damn good position when someone's across my side. Now, when I see his hand coming out, we're going to duck our hand through and lock it right here so that I'm underneath my training partner's armpit. My second hand comes off the hip and here and close to my chest. So that as Mateus makes a transition into north-south, we're going to get opportunities to bring our legs up and connect the knees and the elbows. So it's like an overhead elbow escape. Now, we form that scissor. So that as Mateus finds himself in a scissor, if he goes around in this direction, my left foot stays connected to him. If he goes around in this direction, my right leg stays connected to him. And that scissor action makes it very easy for us to start to turn, to get our center line lined up with our opponent, and from here, we're back in a good offensive cycle, ready to attack. We went from a 100% defensive situation to one where now we can afford to be offensive. So once again, we have an opponent who's done a good job of getting across our side. From here, we start off with our hands in a sound defensive position with a reverse crossface and a forearm frame here. As I see my opponent making the transition, look how we place everything in. When he tries to come around the corner, we're now going to be in a situation where I can join elbow and knee. And as a result, we can make a good turn on our training partner. And from here, we find ourselves ready to attack down on the mat. This simple anticipation is the single easiest way to escape from side control. Because even as, from north-south position, even as your opponent is making the transition, you've already created the space that will be required to hit that overhead elbow escape, make a quick turn on your opponent using that scissor guard, and then from that position, you can easily put him back in a conventional form of guard. Now, let's go further into our north-south escape sequence. We just looked at the number one method of escaping, which relies on anticipation. My opponent started off across my side, transitioned to north-south. I saw the transition happening, and I wedged inside my opponent's wedges, and as a result, we could hit that elbow escape, spin, and put him back in guard. Now, let's look at a situation where you're a day late and a dollar short, and your opponent has gotten to one form of the three north-south positions. This is where he's over both of our arms. So, Mateus has successfully gotten to a north-south position. And from here, my arms are in here, and he goes north-south, and from here, he has successfully gone over my two arms. Now, from this position, what are we going to do as far as escape goes? Ultimately, I want to enter with my knees inside my opponent's collarbones. How am I going to do that? Because right now, his collarbones are very, very close to my chest, and I can't physically bring my knee inside and insert them in. So what are we going to do? We're going to start with a strong bridging action. As my opponent locks on tight to me here, we're going to start by taking our feet in close, and from here I engage in a strong bridging action overhead, and it pops my training partner's body up. So once again, he's down here with a strong pin holding onto my belt, etc., etc. We're going to take our feet in close to our body. The closer the feet are in, the more we're going to have a capacity to bump and watch Mateus's head. The head rises, and that's all I need. I throw my knee inside and connect my knee and one elbow. I don't need both knees inside. Just one is fine. Then I push and make a turn. And from this position, my legs go into a scissor position. when he tries to put weight on me here, the legs will always hold him off. And as a result, we can easily correct our body and find ourselves in a good position to go on the attack. Once again, we start off with our opponent in close, just like so. From here, he's over my two arms and wedged onto my belt. We bring our feet up close to our own body, just like so. And we're going to start an action which involves a bridge and then my two elbows rising. So it starts with the feet here. And then my elbows rise. And it's that which drops me into a situation where one knee and one elbow can lock. So one leg goes over my opponent's head and one knee goes under my opponent's head. And this creates a situation coming towards me where you have a leg over the head and a leg under the head. And it's that which enables us to push our opponent off and from here return back to the safety of guard. Doing this solo, you will notice that from here we have our arms in close. We start with a bridge, and then as we drop, the elbows take over. Okay, so you transfer energy from hips to elbows, and then we connect one elbow and one knee, and then the second leg hooks over the head. So you have a hooking leg and a penetrating knee. From this position, we come in close. Look how the feet come up, bridging and dropping. As a result, the two knees come into their respective position. And from here, we rotate around our opponent. Once we've lined up our center line with his, now it's about recovering our leg position. And from here, we can easily put our opponent back in guard. Now we're looking at the idea of getting out of north-south position. We've identified three kinds of north-south positions. There's double under, double over, and over-under. In the previous sequence, we looked at a situation where our opponent got over both of our arms. Now let's look at a situation where Mateus gets under both of my arms. So here we are, we're bottom north-south, and Mateus has taken his two elbows and locked so that my arms are locked out here. If we shift our body position, you'll clearly see that Mateus is underneath both of my armpits with his elbows. And as a result, it can feel like it's a very difficult thing indeed to move from a situation like this. Okay? Now, you're going to notice, because your opponent is further down your body now, because he's under the arms, that bridging ceases to become effective. If Mateus was over my arms, as in the previous move, his body is not very far down mine. So bridging can move his head and create an easy overhead elbow escape. Not easy, but easier. Okay? That all changes when Mateus gets underneath both of my arms. Now his head is so far down my body that bridging barely moves his head. It's completely ineffective. So what are we going to do now? What we're going to do is we're going to use a very different form of body movement to generate kazushi. Instead of using bridging to try to move the head, we're going to lock into our training partner's hips. You can use a belt grip here and lock, or you can just post inside your training partner's hips with the thumbs like so. And from here, we're going to take our 2 feet with our and put them together. I don't want my feet apart for the move we're about to hit. We're going to use our 2 legs in unison, and we're going to hit a pendulum action that gets my body moving underneath my training partner's body. And this will change the angle between me and Mateus from north-south to one much closer to side position. Okay? So I'm just going to demonstrate this fundamental body movement solo a couple of times. Okay? This jackknifing movement of my body, a pendulum jackknife, is designed to radically change the north-south relationship between us. In north-south, we start off more or less lined up with each other, something close to alignment. It's not pure alignment, but it's pretty close. But what we're looking to do with this jackknifing is bring us back to a perpendicular angle. So what's involved in it is we connect to our opponent's body, usually at the hips, either through the belt or just with a thumb post, and we keep our feet together. Because my feet are together, it creates a very strong momentum when my two legs move in unison. If my feet come apart, you greatly reduce the amount of momentum you can generate to generate movement underneath your opponent. So we want our feet unified. This is going to make a situation where I can easily swing from one side of my body to the other. And it's quite difficult for my opponent to prevent movement down the mat. You will notice that I'm moving down the mat as I engage in this motion. And as a result, the distance between myself and my opponent is increasing. Now, anytime you're being pinned, if you can generate space between you and your opponent, that's a positive thing. That's a good thing. So as we post on our opponent's hips and we generate that pendulum motion, we start moving down the mat and further away. And he finds it difficult to follow because you're posting on the hips. So you're increasing the space between you and your opponent. And at the same time, you're changing the angle. If you can reliably change the angle between you and your opponent and increase the space at the same time, you're going to find it a lot easier to get out of north-south positions. So let's have a look at it now with Mateus on top. Once again, Mateus comes in and he locks under my two arms. My initial thing here is to form an effective connection to Mateus. I could go with the belt or I could go with thumb posts inside the hip. They're both good options. I leave that up to you. Now, from here, you can see my arms are sharply bent. So if I tried to bench press Mateus from here, it would not be effective. I would be pushing into my own belt. This would not be an effective means out. If I try to bridge, Mateus's head is so far down towards my center of gravity that bridging has almost no effect. So instead, we start an action of moving out like so. Now, from here, we've got a change in angle where I'm almost side position on my opponent, and there's a lot more distance between us. And as a result, it's going to be much easier for me to thread my elbow through on my training partner, like so. Now, I'm in a good position to reach for my training partner's leg. And from here, we can scissor back up into one of our favorite attacking positions. Single leg situation, down on the mat. My hand posts. Mateus wants to square up and sprawl. But I keep my head high, and as a result, we're able to pull our training partner's foot and cover the hips and go into a nice reversal. Okay? So once again, we have an opponent in a good position on top of us. And Mateus has done a great job of getting underneath my two arms, so I find it very, very difficult from here to bridge or move away from him. So we need a mechanism to move away. So I start swinging my legs. Now, guys, when you're training this move, let's be mindful of where your opponent's head is. Sometimes in a beginner's class, I'll see people banging their opponent's head with their knees, okay? That's not the idea at all. That shouldn't be happening. My feet go together, and you'll see I can generate momentum away from my opponent without ever getting close to my opponent's head. Now from here, I take my hand off the hip and I bring it through, okay? From a situation like this, you could even go back into side elbow skates because of the change in angle. But I do have to be careful here because my opponent can step around behind me and go to my back. Okay, so that's the main danger we face now, coming back. So to make that more difficult, we want to make sure we get a hold of our training partner's leg. And as a result, when he tries to spin behind, it's quite a difficult thing. Now, we start bringing the head up. My ear aims for the far hip, and we put our opponent down to the floor and end up in good position down on the mat. I'll just demonstrate the move from a range of different angles so you can see what's going on here. Okay, Mateus is out here north-south, and he's gotten underneath my two arms like so. We're going to start by posting in our training partner's hips. Now from here, we start using a momentum in our legs, which makes it possible for us to go through. As Mateus goes to spin behind me, I hold one-handed here. Don't lock with two hands. Hold one-handed. Mateus goes to spin behind, and I'll always be able to get up and into a situation where from here, we can easily put him down into good position. Demonstrating from a different angle. This time Mateus is directly over the camera. From here, look how we bring our legs and catch. He goes to spin behind me, finds it difficult because of the control that I have of the lower leg. If I lock my hands here, he can easily sprawl and go past my legs, around to my back. So we lock in here, okay? Now, I quickly get up to my base, and from this situation, we find ourselves in an excellent attacking position. This is an excellent way for us to get up from what would normally be a punishing pin and into top position. I'm just going to demonstrate something with regards to the kipping action of our legs, which gets the space generated between myself and my opponent. When I do this live, it's a combination of several different things. Part of it is jackknifing, where my legs jackknife side to side, like so. And you often see people using this method, okay? But what I like to do is add a kip at the end of it, so that I get a stronger hip movement onto my side, okay? So my opponent's on top of me. Look how, once I lock in here at the hips, I can generate a surprising amount of motion underneath my opponent. Even when Mateus locks onto my belt, okay, and he's pinching his elbows, he's not giving this to me for free. He's a strong kid, and he's a world champion, and holding on tight. But from here, just the pressure in the hips, combined with a strong kipping motion, means I can create the space that I need to be effective from here. Now, the main danger here is that my opponent will start the action of spinning behind me, okay? So we want to make sure that we pull our bodies in, and we get up to our knees, and we get a good grip on our training partner's lower leg. And it's that which is going to enable me to get up to my base. Now from here, we start the action of bringing the head up, seizing our training partner's heel, and down to the mat we go. Now, we're escaping from north-south with our opponent underneath both of our arms, the so-called double under situation. Do you remember when we first started talking about escaping from north-south, I said something along the following lines. I said that people often confuse north-south escapes with side escapes. In most side escapes, most of the time we initiate with a strong elbow escape, a conventional elbow escape that one often sees in these side pin situations. And my point was that we can't use that in bottom north-south because the angle's changed, and we have to use an overhead elbow escape as an alternative. Well, if I can change the angle from north-south back to side control, why not use a conventional side control elbow escape? That's a very good option. Let's have a look at how we can use jackknifing, the body movement of jackknifing, to make that possible. Okay, same situation as previously. Mateus does a good job of getting underneath my two arms. So we know that the best frame in these situations is the hips. Okay, so I take two hands on my training partner's hips, and I either grab the belt or a thumb post. Okay, we know that the fundamental body movement here is not bridging. My opponent's head is too far down my body now for a bridge to be effective. So instead we use jackknifing, and if possible, we use a kipping action of our legs to strengthen that jackknifing. Now, what this is designed to do is to create a situation where the angle changes between us, so that Mateus is no longer north-south upon me. Rather, we're now more or less in a side position. From here, I'm going to use my post arm to prevent Mateus from walking around behind my back. So I lengthen out my arm here like so. If I let go, there's a danger of Mateus running behind me, and threatening my back. So it's important here that we control our training partner with that stiff arm. Okay? Now when Mateus goes to run behind me, the stiff arm will keep me lined up with him. And there's no reason now why I can't start putting this guy back in guard. There's one danger, this arm. When I try to bring my knee in, Mateus is blocking me. I can't bring my knee in. So what we're going to do from here is we're going to build up to our knees, just like so. Once I come up to my knees, now I've created a space where I can slide my knee in front of my opponent and start getting knees back in front. And from here, we can put our opponent back in guard. So once again, we have an opponent on top of us. We lock in. We use that same jackknifing action that we used earlier to increase space between myself and my opponent and change the angle. I would love if he'd let go to just bring my knee in and put him back in guard. But no one's going to give you that kind of gift. Okay? They're going to use their right hand to prevent you from putting them back in guard. So what we're going to do is we're going to scissor and come up off our knees so that I can post and bring my knee inside his defensive arm. Now I can release my training partner, line my body up with him, and we'll find ourselves in a perfect attacking position, ready to go to work down on the mat. Okay? This is a very, very effective way to change the angle and go back into conventional elbow escapes. Now bear in mind that this is a position which often degenerates into a scramble. As your opponent feels you getting up to your knees, etc., often there will be quick transitions. So be flexible about this. Understand that as scrambles ensue, all you have to do is end up back in guard. So for example, I'll run you through some scenarios here. My opponent's on top. When we come around the corner, it might well be the case that as I come up to my base here, my opponent releases the hand. Okay? In which case, we'll just go straight back to guard. If my opponent maintains the hand, then it's possible, for example, that I could build up to an elbow, just like so, and prop, and as a result, pull my opponent back in variations of guard. Sometimes, from a situation like so, my opponent rapidly goes to spin around behind me and my hand comes off. From the situation, we may end up rolling to put our opponent back in guard. There's a whole range of defensive options there, and the onus will be on you to use the one which is appropriate under the circumstances. If you see your opponent running behind you, typically rolling over a shoulder is a fine way to counter this. If your opponent stays static, any form of elbow escape will prove to be effective. The main thing I want you focusing on is the idea that you started north-south, but through this jackknifing motion, you ended up perpendicular to your opponent. And from there, you can threaten elbow escapes. As your opponent reacts to that threat, you can use any one of the main defensive maneuvers that we learn in this video to put them back in guard and get your game going from bottom position once again. Now, we've been looking at north-south escapes, and we've identified 3 different kinds of north-south. We looked at escaping from double over situations, which typically is done by some variation of elbow escapes. We looked at double under situations, which is typically escaped by jackknifing our legs back and forth and either coming up to our knees or changing the angle and putting them back in guard with some kind of elbow escape. Now let's look at the third and arguably the most difficult of all the north-south positions to get out of. This is where my opponent goes for a compromise solution, where he goes under one of my arms and over the other. This makes him particularly dangerous because the undergrip gives him strong control of me, and the overgrip gives him an ability to attack with all kinds of submissions, kimuras, arm locks, north-south strangles, etc., etc. So this one can be a tough one to deal with. It's almost as controlling as double unders, and it's almost as dangerous as double overs, and has the good features of both. Let's have a look at how to get out. Okay, Mateus goes under my left arm and over my right. So he's in here, okay? Now, let's change the angle so you can see very clearly what he's doing to me. He's over my right and he's under my left, okay? And as a result, he could start, for example, to push my arm across the body and go to kimura. He could turn the kimura into an arm lock. From there, he can turn it into triangles, all kinds of madness, and things rapidly go from bad to worse. When he gets underneath my arm, he can bring my head up off the floor and quickly go into a north-south strangle from here and start strangling me in this position, like so. Okay? So there's a bunch of good things that Mateus can do in this situation, this over-under. Okay? So once again, we start off north-south, over-under situation, just like so. Now, when I see my opponent working in this position, we know off the bat, because of his left arm position, that bridging is not going to prove to be very effective. So we're going to go back to our training partner's hips. often what I will do under these circumstances is as he goes to control my arm, I will punch my own arm through and go and force myself back to double unders. And then any of the movements that we saw previously will work just fine. Okay? But that's not the only way of operating in this position. One of my favorite ways to work in this situation is an elbow escape on my training partner's arm. I'm going to take my elbow and knee together, and I'm going to lock and put my shin in front of my training partner's bicep. My hand is going to go from my training partner's tricep down to his wrist. And as he tries to hold on to me, I'm going to use kind of like a spider guard effect, where I push and I generate space where he goes down my body. Okay? As he goes down the body, there's no reason now why we can't bring our legs around the corner and square up to our opponent and put him back in guard. So once again, Mateus goes under on one side and over on the other. From here, we're going to take our body and jackknife over to the side, and we're going to elbow escape inside his arm. We're going to migrate our hand down to our training partner's wrist, and even as Mateus tries to put all his weight on top of me, look how I can use my right leg almost like a kind of a spider guard action, where I control the bicep and I can move my training partner's body down my body. Once his body goes this far down, there's no reason why I can't frame on the hip and bring my leg into the uncontested circle and start putting my opponent back in a position where I can go on the attack. I'll show that from a different angle. From a north-south situation where Mateus has gone over my arm on one side, under on the other. From here, look how I use a jackknife to move on to my side. I elbow escape on the arm, lock in place, even as Mateus comes up north-south on me and tries to hold me down. Watch how with the use of my right leg I can move him down my body. And as a result, we can post, the legs come around, and we find ourselves back in a working position. Okay? So this is one excellent way in which we can use a kind of a pseudo elbow escape action on our opponent's arm to get inside position and kill the movement. So what have we got so far? First, from over under, I can punch my own hands through and go and put myself in double under situation. And then any one of the escapes that we saw from double under will prove to be very effective. Or alternatively, my opponent goes into this position. Look how we use that same jackknife in action to get onto our side, and we block our training partner there at the arm. When Mateus tries to pull his arm free, it's surprisingly difficult. You've got a good bite on your opponent's arm, and as a result, we can now frame, bring our legs in, and find ourselves in a good attacking position once again. This is a very effective way for us to work our way out of the annoying and often very problematic over-under north-south position.